for a moment and think of something you believe to be true. This could be the fact that the sky is blue, something such as pizza tastes terrible with pineapple on it, or the knowledge that Antarctica has a lot of snow and ice. So now that you have that belief in your mind, ask yourself, how did you come to hold that belief? Where did the idea come from? And what makes you so sure that it's true? There are many ways we come to acquire the knowledge that we do. The focus of this course is on the use of science as a way of knowing, but to appreciate why we rely so heavily on science to learn about things, let's talk about a few other ways of knowing about the world. There are many different ways of knowing about the world, and we are going to touch on 6 of the most commonly used in our daily lives. Tradition, or tenacity, is when we consider something to be valid because we have heard it so often or for so long. Examples of this include traditional truisms passed down from generation to generation, such as "a stitch in time saves 9," or "feed a cold, starve a fever." When information is repeated to us or handed down over time, we tend to accept it as true without any sort of evaluation. And we know from psychology that simply repeating an idea can increase the likelihood that people will believe it. However, now consider the fact that many traditionally accepted truisms are actually contradictory. On the one hand, we have "out of sight, out of mind," while on the other we have "absence makes the heart grow fonder." Or we've all heard "birds of a feather flock together," but how does that fit with the saying that opposites attract? Or on a different note, consider that most people in the 17th century believed that the sun orbited the earth. Chances are Galileo had such a difficult time changing people's minds because this was something they had been told and had believed all their lives. This is not to say that all knowledge gained through tradition or tenacity is wrong or can't be useful, just that we can't merely know something is true because it has always been believed to be true. Another way of knowing, intuition, occurs when beliefs or knowledge come to us without any direct involvement of our senses. Rather, they come from within. Usually we'll say that something just feels true or that we have a gut feeling about it, even though we don't have any sort of objective evidence to support that feeling. So, for example, we may size up a stranger within the first few seconds of meeting him or her, before this individual has any chance to act or say anything. This generation of knowledge occurs through a spontaneous instinctive process. While intuition can be a helpful way of knowing when we have access to very little information or when a decision needs to be made quickly, it's not always the most reliable way of knowing. Different people can easily construct different contradictory viewpoints based upon their unique experiences. For example, a shy, reserved person may perceive a particular social situation as threatening and to be avoided, while a really outgoing person may see that same situation as an opportunity to meet new people, which may lead to opportunities. A big source of knowledge in our daily lives is that of authority. This involves accepting that some information is true because it was claimed to be so by a source that we respect or take to be an expert. For example, your mom may have taught you that if you pull a funny face, it will stick permanently. We are also relying on authority whenever we say, "I read that," or "I saw somewhere that," or "I heard that." We quite often learn and accept this sort of knowledge through our parents, our teachers, our doctors, our religious leaders, and famous people, and quite often from the media. While authority figures may be right and may be really good sources of information much of the time, we have to remember that being an authority or being an expert doesn't make them always right. Parents can pass on prejudices to their children, or the weatherman may predict rain when it doesn't happen. A doctor can make an educated guess as to the best medication for a condition, but not end up picking the right one. And two authority figures may have differing opinions, and there may be no clear answer that exists at the time, but we know that they can't both be right. Or the motivations for authority figures may be more aligned with that of businesses and advertisers. A more rigorous method of acquiring knowledge is through reasoning and logic. Rational conclusions are made from the application of rules of logic. We start with some basic assumptions, and beliefs are then deducted from those prior assumptions using rules of logic. Let's take the following statements for example. All fruits have seeds. Tomatoes have seeds. Therefore, we can logically deduce that tomatoes are fruit. Logical reasoning is a very reliable means of generating rational conclusions. However, this way of knowing still requires confirmation from other evidence. Conclusions based on logical deduction are only as sound as the initial assumptions they are based on. For example, let's say all dogs have fur. A Mexican hairless is a type of dog. Therefore, a Mexican hairless has fur. While our conclusion is a rational one, because our original assumptions are incorrect, our conclusion also becomes incorrect. Another problem we face with reasoning is that it is possible to construct logical arguments for both sides of a debate. Take the issue of how to handle illegal immigration into the U.S. Regardless of what side of the debate you take, it is easy to construct logical arguments that lead to differing conclusions for how to handle the issue. Empiricism is the acquisition of knowledge through our senses or direct observation, or by the use of tools that extend our senses. With empiricism, the knowledge can be verified by others using their own senses or tools. In other words, the experience is measurable or quantifiable. Empiricism is a very powerful and reliable way of knowing, but it still needs to be combined with other ways of knowing in order to be useful. After all, we can't possibly directly experience everything there is to know. For example, just because we have never visited Antarctica doesn't mean that it doesn't exist or that it isn't cold there. Many would argue that science is the most reliable way to acquire knowledge. Science is the acquisition of knowledge through the interaction of empiricism and reasoning. We use empiricism to gather data or evidence, and then we use reasoning to explain our data and generalize them to other situations. This is a preferred way of knowing because it is the most objective or least subjective. In other words, it is least likely to be affected by our personal biases and preconceptions, and most likely to be viewed or understood in the same way by many people. Of course, any way of knowing will always involve some degree of human subjectivity, so long as it is being carried out by humans. But science comes the closest to a way of knowing based on evidence and tools that everyone has access to and can use. But like all ways of knowing, science too has its limitations. For example, as with empiricism, it is limited to domains that can be directly measured. We have a really difficult time using science, for example, to address questions about consciousness or religion. Further, the tools or measurements we use may not always measure exactly what we think they are measuring. In this course, we will talk about the many limitations of science and what researchers do to minimize them.